The 911 dispatcher's voice crackled through Margaret Henderson's phone as she stood trembling on my front porch, her designer heels sinking into the welcome mat. She shrieked into the receiver with a voice so shrill it could shatter glass, claiming I had attacked her and that she had discovered evidence of criminal activity in my home. What she conveniently failed to mention to the poor dispatcher was that she had just broken into my locked safe and stolen classified FBI documents from an active federal investigation. I suppose I should back up and explain how we got here. My name is James Mitchell, and 3 months ago I moved to the outskirts of Willow Creek, a small town with an HOA so strict they once fined a resident for having their garbage cans visible from the street for 5 minutes past the approved window. The ranch property I purchased sat right at the edge of their jurisdiction, which apparently was close enough for them to consider me their business from day one. The neighbors whispered about the mysterious new rancher who kept odd hours and rarely attended community events. I could feel their eyes on me whenever I drove through the neighborhood gate, especially those of Margaret Henderson, or as everyone called her, Karen. She served as the HOA president with the kind of zealous dedication usually reserved for religious crusades or competitive eating contests. Karen stood about 5'4" in her perpetual uniform of pressed khakis and pastel cardigans with perfectly styled blonde hair that never moved even in strong winds. She carried a clipboard everywhere and had memorized every single HOA regulation, which she could recite faster than most people could say the alphabet. Her favorite hobby seemed to be finding violations where none existed. The first time we met, she appeared at my door within 72 hours of my arrival, clipboard in hand and fake smile plastered across her face. She informed me with sugary sweetness that my moving truck had been parked in my own driveway for 6 minutes longer than the HOA guidelines permitted for commercial vehicles. When I pointed out that the truck was already gone, she simply made a note on her clipboard and said she would be watching, and what she did, I started noticing her silver SUV creeping past my property at all hours. She would slow down near my driveway, sometimes even stopping to take photos with her phone. Once I caught her peering through my workshop windows while I was inside working on equipment maintenance. When I opened the door to confront her, she claimed she was inspecting my property line for potential fence violations. The situation escalated when she began following me into town. I would see her at the hardware store lurking behind displays of paint cans. She appeared at the feed store pretending to examine chicken wire while watching me load supplies. The local coffee shop owner even mentioned that she had been asking questions about my purchasing habits and whether I seemed suspicious. I maintained my cover as a simple rancher, never giving her any real ammunition for her paranoid theories. But Karen's obsession only grew stronger. She started sending me violation notices for increasingly absurd infractions. My mailbox was apparently too tall. The color of my workshop door was not on the approved earth tone palette. My truck's tire tracks on my own gravel driveway constituted improper landscaping. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I had driven to the city for a meeting with my handler, a routine check-in that required me to be gone for several hours. When I returned, something felt off immediately. The gate to my property stood slightly ajar, though I distinctly remembered closing it fresh. Footprints led from the gate to my workshop, where the door showed signs of tampering inside the workshop. My worst fears materialized. The false panel I had installed to conceal the safe hung open, with splintered around the edges where someone had pried it apart with considerable force. The safe itself, a high-security model that should have been impenetrable to amateur thieves, sat wide open. The sophisticated lock had been bypassed using some kind of electronic device, and the contents were gone. My blood ran cold as I realized what had been taken: 3 flash drives containing surveillance footage of key suspects, detailed documentation of financial transactions linking several prominent business owners to a regional crime syndicate, photos and audio recordings gathered over 18 months of careful undercover work, all of it designed to take down an operation that had been flooding the region with illegal weapons and drugs. The security camera I had hidden in the workshop corner told the whole story. There was Karen letting herself onto my property with bolt cutters. She spent 20 minutes searching my workshop before discovering the hidden panel, then with surprising technical skill for someone who claimed computers confused her, she had used what appeared to be a black market safe cracking device to access the safe's contents. I watched her face transform from smug satisfaction to confused concern as she examined the documents. Even someone as oblivious as Karen could recognize FBI letterheads and classified markings, but instead of immediately returning the items or calling the authorities to report her discovery, she had stuffed everything into her oversized purse and fled the scene. That brought us to the present moment, with Karen standing on my porch screaming into her phone about the dangerous criminal living in their midst. She had apparently gone home, reviewed the stolen materials more carefully, and decided her best course of action was to call 911, and claimed she had been investigating suspicious activity when I had attacked her. I opened my front door just as she was describing her fabricated injuries to the dispatcher. Her eyes went wide with panic when she saw me standing there completely calm and uninjured. Obviously not having attacked anyone, she took a step backward, nearly tumbling off the porch in her heels without saying a word. I held up my phone and pressed play on the security footage of her breaking into my workshop. The color drained from her face as she watched herself commit multiple felonies in high-definition video. Her voice faltered as she tried to maintain her story to the dispatcher, who was now asking increasingly skeptical questions about the timeline of events. Within minutes, sirens filled the air, but instead of the local police cruisers Karen had expected, a convoy of black versus with federal plates roared up my driveway. FBI agents in tactical gear poured out quickly, securing the scene. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as agents surrounded her, weapons drawn but not pointed, creating an intimidating circle of federal authority. The lead agent, a woman with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, approached Karen with a kind of measured steps that suggested barely contained fury. She identified herself as Special Agent Patricia Chen and informed Karen that she was now part of an active federal investigation. The items Karen had stolen were evidence in a multi-state racketeering case that had taken years to build. Karen tried to explain, her words tumbling over each other in a panicked rush. She was just trying to protect the neighborhood. She insisted the rancher was suspicious, always coming and going at odd hours. She had a responsibility as HOA president to investigate potential threats to their community. Surely they could understand her position. Special Agent Chen's expression remained stone cold as she informed Karen that breaking and entering, theft of federal property, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering were serious federal crimes. Each charge carried significant prison time, and Karen had managed to rack up all of them in a single afternoon. The agent's voice carried the weight of someone whose years of careful work had just been jeopardized by suburban entitlement. The other HOA board members began arriving, drawn by the spectacle of federal vehicles and agents swarming the normally quiet street. They watched in stunned silence as agents searched Karen's SUV, finding her purse with the stolen documents still inside. Her laptop and phone were seized as evidence, along with the safe cracking device she had foolishly left in her vehicle. As word spread through the neighborhood, the full scope of the situation became clear. The mysterious rancher they had all gossiped about was actually an undercover FBI asset placed in their community to monitor suspects in a dangerous criminal organization. His odd hours and secretive behavior were not signs of criminal activity, but the necessary precautions of someone risking their life to protect public safety. Karen's obsessive surveillance and eventual break-in had potentially blown his cover, putting both the operation and his life at risk. Years of careful investigation hung in the balance because one woman couldn't mind her own business. The crime syndicate they were investigating had eyes everywhere, and news of FBI presence in the area would spread quickly. The agents worked through the night assessing the damage and trying to salvage what they could of the operation. My handler arrived within hours, grim-faced and frustrated. The decision was made to accelerate the timeline, moving in on suspects before they could destroy evidence or flee. It was far from ideal, but Karen's actions had forced their hand. Meanwhile, Karen sat in federal custody, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, her pressed khakis wrinkled, From hours in an interrogation room, the reality of her situation slowly sank in, as federal prosecutors laid out the charges: breaking and entering a felony, theft of government property, and other felony obstruction of justice for potentially compromising an ongoing investigation, evidence tampering for removing classified documents from a crime scene. Her lawyer, hastily called from the suburbs, looked increasingly pale as the prosecutors explained the sentencing guidelines. Each charge carried years in federal prison, and the government was not inclined to be lenient given the damage her actions had caused. They had recordings of her previous harassment, documentation of her pattern of trespassing, and clear video evidence of her crimes. The HOA board held an emergency meeting the next day, voting unanimously to remove Karen from her position as president. Her decades-long reign of terror over the neighborhood ended with a simple voice vote, and no fanfare. The local news picked up the story, and soon Karen's face was plastered across television screens with headlines about the HOA president who accidentally robbed the FBI. Her real estate business, built on her reputation as a pillar of the community, crumbled overnight. Clients canceled contracts, not wanting to be associated with someone under federal investigation. The country club revoked her membership. Even the local garden society, where she had served as treasurer, politely asked her to step down from all responsibilities. As the federal case proceeded, more details emerged about the criminal organization I had been investigating. They had been using local businesses to launder money from drug and weapon sales, corrupting officials, and threatening anyone who asked him many questions. The operation I was part of had been close to gathering enough evidence for arrests and convictions that would have dismantled the entire network. Karen's actions had nearly derailed everything. Several suspects had time to destroy evidence before agents could move in. Others fled the area entirely, requiring nationwide manhunts. The carefully constructed case now had holes that prosecutors would have to work around, all because one woman thought she knew better than everyone else. The plea negotiations dragged on for months. Karen's lawyer argued for leniency, claiming she had good intentions and was merely an overzealous citizen trying to protect her community. The federal prosecutors countered with the massive damage her actions had caused, the resources wasted, and the criminals who had escaped justice because of her interference. In the end, Karen faced the judge for sentencing with none of her former confidence. The woman who had once terrorized neighbors over lawn height and mailbox callers now stood accused of serious federal crimes. The judge, reviewing the case, noted the particular irony of someone so obsessed with rules and regulations showing complete disregard for actual laws. He sentenced her to 5 years in federal prison plus 3 years of supervised release. The financial penalties were equally severe, with fines totaling $250,000 and restitution to cover the costs of the compromised operation. Karen's face crumpled as the judge read the sentence, her hands shaking as the reality of spending the next 5 years behind bars sank